Hello everyone, welcome to the episode 13 of SoLeadSaturday. The guest we have today, George. His expertise includes data governance, BI, data management, and information quality. Also, he is a public speaker and he runs his own YouTube channel. So let's hear his career journey. How did he find his passion and manage to be one of the leaders in the areas he is passionate about? Welcome, George, on my Solid Saturday podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you on this Saturday.
Yeah, likewise. So thank you so much. So to begin with, when I saw your profile, right, you started your career journey with the software developer, actually software engineering side, and transform your career to the different roles like manager, consultant, and then now you are like a full-fledged into the data governance and BI, which is like latest technologies and trends. So how did you do that? Like, when you look back, and also you are a public speaker and YouTube content creator. So what do you enjoy the most?
Yeah, you know, well, let's start with the first question and how I
Mm-hmm.
became, or how did I arrive in my current role as a data governance director and BI director for the University of British Columbia. And really, I've been working with data governance for quite some time now. And I think, I guess, as a software developer, web developer as well, I was always working with data,
Mm-hmm.
right? More from the back end, working with databases and so forth. And I guess I never really understood that importance of data. I mean, I knew of it, but I never really understood, well, what's the impact of that bad data quality, of a lack of data governance? So that gave me the first exposure into all this technical metadata. But then later on in my career, when I started working as a project manager, business analyst,
Mm-hmm.
I started to understand a bit more on that impact. What does that do with the business, and how are the business needs and the business requirements influencing all these areas in data management? And then I really just fell into it. I started a position as a data quality manager, which was again focused on improving the quality of the data for this organization. And of course, you cannot have a proper data quality without data governance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a role that I, progressed, evolved into a data governance role
Mm-hmm.
from that driver. But yeah, I don't think you can really necessarily train, from the school benches to become a data governance practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably something that you learn and you adapt to the organization's needs.
Mm-hmm.
So to your second question, as a public speaker and YouTube content creator, I really enjoy those a lot. Out of the whole process, I probably enjoy the video editing the most. It plays a little bit on my creative side, so I love to exercise that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love really creating content and something that can be engaging, something that can play on my passions on data management, data governance. So yes, I do enjoy being in front of a camera, being in front of people, and sharing knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. So when did you realize your passion towards the data actually? Found your interest that I would like to divert my career into it.
Yeah, you know,
Mm-hmm.
unknowingly, I think it was when I was a kid. I think I mentioned that short story with you. I used to have these Lego sets, which I don't anymore, unfortunately. I wish I did. So I used to have all these Lego sets, one with a pirate theme, one with a space theme, one with a city theme, and so forth and so on. And I remember the first day my best friend came to play with my Lego sets, and we were going to play together. And he started combining the sets, right? Which, showed a lot of imagination, a lot of creativity on his behalf. But to me, it did not make sense. How can you combine the pirates with space or the day-to-day activities that I had in the city set?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really shows my interest into having to want to organize data
Mm-hmm.
in in different categories and manage it as such, right?
Mm-hmm.
But later on, again, as I started to work with data more and more, and I started to understand really the impact and the relationship that it has with the business, and
Mm-hmm.
especially I think as a project manager, I really enjoyed that role as a project manager because it allowed me to do a lot of a diverse
Mm-hmm.
number of things. And it was not just playing on my technical side, but also on the communication piece and interaction with people and that whole business analysis and planning. And I think data governance just plays a little bit on each one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's in a way it's not a really rewarding role to be in data governance specifically because there are a lot of challenges, a lot of politics being involved, a lot of sometimes conflicts, quite a bit of change management.
Mm-hmm.
So things can take a long time at
Mm-hmm.
times to see them to fruition. But once they do, it's very rewarding to see that what you have done really has an impact on so many people, processes, systems, procedures, and so on.
Yeah. So we're talking about the change management actually. So how hard it is when it comes to the organization level change management. There are lots of challenges involved, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think overall with change management, it's a very
Mm-hmm.
complex topic, right? I mean, everybody wants change
Mm-hmm.
when you're asking them. Everybody is raising their hand. Yeah, I do want change. But when you're asking them to change, nobody's there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really wants to take part of it. Or if you're asking, well, who wants to lead change? Very rarely you find a person with their hands up.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex topic because I think it really challenges our status quo, right? And really, and I think it's in our nature as human beings to prefer
Mm-hmm.
what we have right now, even though it might not work very well.
Mm-hmm.
But the change might bring all these unknowns. So if change management is not done properly, it's not involving the individual, it's not involving, the department heads, but also all the people involved in that department, and for them to understand what's in it for them,
Mm-hmm.
then they will have that natural resistance to it.
Yes. Yeah. So makes sense to me as well. So moving to the next question, back to your interest like data governance.
Yeah,
So why does an organization need to have the data governance? You already mentioned that there won't be a data quality without the data governance. But
right.
again, talking briefly on to that topic actually, what are the specific needs that organization needs to work on the data governance side?
Right. So, well, I think all organizations working with data, and that's really most of them, they do need data governance.
Mm-hmm.
If we actually, take a step back in time and kind of think how everything started, right? And really, when organizations really began the adoption of data processing technologies and systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were really built to support transactional business processes to
Mm-hmm.
make them just less labor intensive. So things like processing or actually just recording an order at the time. I think it was 1960s. It was more on, well, let's record this in a spreadsheet
Mm-hmm.
or balancing a general ledger or just a bunch of other accounting functions. So data was really more of a byproduct of running a business. And I think organizations didn't really see any value in it beyond the transaction itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then in the 90s, in the early 2000s, data was starting to be seen a little bit more as an asset, a little bit more valuable. It was actually a data analyst from Tesco, and I forgot his name, but
Mm-hmm.
he's the one that coined the famous term
Mm-hmm.
that some data management people love, some truly hate it, that
Mm-hmm.
data is the new oil, right? So he coined that term, and he coined it because as he was working on this Tesco membership card, and Tesco is a supermarket in the UK. So he was working on this client card, right? You get rewards points with it,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously was getting a lot of information, a lot of data, and he realized that really it's like striking oil
Mm-hmm.
when he was doing the analysis on that particular
Mm-hmm.
data sets. And that is because it really gave so many insights and hindsights and foresights to Tesco that it even made him a millionaire. He won a lot of money. He
Mm,
earned a lot of money because of it. So he's a good success story. So in the 1990s, I think, again, data was starting to be seen as an asset, and that's when data governance gained some tractions.
mhm,
And as systems really became more complex and um, had more than one system as part of the organization because you couldn't just have one to do it all. And as organizations really started to share or even consume data from other organizations and so on, I think the need for data governance became more and more apparent. And that really stands true today as well. Plus, with the whole legislation around the data and its privacy and usage and so on,
mhm.
again, that shows another need, another facets of why we need data governance.
Okay. So talking about then and now, actually, how do you see this area evolving, data side actually?
Right now,
Yeah. So
on
how do
on
you see, like, how much did it progress, or it is just still in a boom, like, still in the initial stage, or did you see any changes throughout your career now? How
I
it?
think
Yeah.
Well, I think it's definitely gaining more traction. It's
Mm-hmm,
seen as more and more important, especially now that we're on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution with machine learning and AI.
mm-hmm,
It's definitely seen more and more important,
mm-hmm,
right? I mean, the AI is really as good as the data that's feeding it.
mm-hmm,
So I think organizations are starting to realize that data quality then is of utmost important.
mm, yep. That's true.
So,
Actually, I can. Yeah.
so yes, so it's definitely gaining some traction. And again, with all these newer legislations with
Mm-hmm,
GDPR, of course, and CCPA, and I
mm-hmm,
forgot the one that was just released in India or that's coming up. Anyhow,
mm-hmm,
so there are a few countries that are really coming up and beefing up their really consumer privacy laws
mm-hmm,
that surround data. And because of it, again, data governance is seen as an important aspect. Unfortunately, it's also making it a synonym for data privacy and data security, which is not. It's
mm-hmm.
part of it, it's helping with it, but that's not the whole thing.
So, what is involved under the data governance when we talk about it?
Yeah, so in my view, data governance is really a discipline that provides all data management practices with the necessary foundation, the strategy,
Mm-hmm,
and the structure that's needed to ensure that data is managed as an asset and of course transformed into meaningful information. So really it involves people,
mm-hmm,
policies and processes, and sometimes even tools.
mm-hmm,
The way I look at it is if we take a look at HR
mm-hmm,
and we take a look at finance as two
mm-hmm,
departments that we're all familiar with, right? And functions that we're all familiar with. HR, on one hand, they're responsible to manage people as
mm-hmm,
assets,
mm-hmm,
right? And and finance, they're just managing, well, financial assets.
mm-hmm,
Data governance is really doing the same thing, but for data, it's managing data as an asset.
mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm. So
in a way,
it doesn't matter, like, which pipeline or the which vertical the data sits in, like whether it is the finance, in under the finance also you have a different verticals associated. So it is
exactly.
just, yeah, applying the, I got it actually. So is it like having the generalized rules and policies around that data, or is it like whenever it is like a specific pipeline or the vertical is involved, there will be a different rules and policies associated?
I think it's a mix. So coming back to the HR example, right? HR really provides some overall policies on, hey, this is our policy, these are our guidelines, this is our procedures on how we should manage our people. This
Mhm,
is how you write a job description. This is how a person can get an increase or can get fired. They get that performance review, right? So they have all of this, but then it's up to the manager to really apply all of these and also use their better judgment to manage their own people. And I think similar with data governance, there's an overall data policy at the organization level, but then based on the needs of the department, there might be certain variations
mhm,
or really certain specifications that are really just related to that own department. And it's up to that department or that vertical, like you said, that data, specific data domain to yeah, just to manage that piece.
Okay, yep, yep, that makes sense to me as well. So, does data governance restrict the any kind of development, application development, whether it is agile methodology or the waterfall? Does it really impact on those kind of application development environments?
Hmm. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm,
And I think sometimes it's seen that it is restricting those.
mm-hmm,
I think, first of all, what to keep in mind is that the approach to data governance
mm-hmm,
really needs to fit that organization's culture. And then to also take under consideration the maturity of its data management and project management methodology. So it might be agile, might just be waterfall, whatever it might be. I think it's better if it does fit with it, if it follows it. Now, it should also take under consideration the drivers of the data governance program and the objectives of the organization that it needs to meet.
mm-hmm,
Okay. Now, usually, the more mature the data governance program becomes, the
mm-hmm,
more agile it tends to be. Because in the early stages of data governance, really, it tends to be very reactive.
mm-hmm,
But if policies, procedures, the framework, they're all well defined and that they are aligned to adhere to an agile environment,
mm-hmm,
then data governance is up to the task to comply quicker to new requirements for data.
mm-hmm,
And I think we've seen that in particular with GDPR, companies, organizations have been very slow at and very reactive at meeting all these new requirements.
mm-hmm,
But hopefully now they're going to adopt a more agile approach.
mm-hmm,
And I think that's really the question, right? Can data governance adopt a more agile approach in its early stages? And I think so. But in order to be more agile, it does require a lot more communication and a lot more change management. Okay, because the difference is that in the application development, a change only tends to affect the users of that application, whereas in data governance, it can affect the entire data domain, all the applications tying into it, all the business units that are using that data.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
yes.
So it covers couple of things about, like, the second question as well along the same line. Like somebody asked, like, if my organization hasn't got any data governance, where does
Mhm.
it start? So to already you mentioned, like, it should be agile in the early stages. So any other things along with those lines?
Well, yeah, if you don't have a data governance program yet,
Mm-hmm,
first, I think you need to understand why do you need one.
mm-hmm,
Now, again, it's everyone should have one,
mm-hmm,
but the need, really the driver there might be different.
mm-hmm,
So it could be again that regulatory compliance that
mm-hmm,
we briefly talked about. It could really be specific to a business need, such as gaining a competitive advantage.
mm-hmm,
The company wants to get more customers,
mm-hmm,
and so on, right? And they want to do that again through better data analytics, investing in AI. They want to have a more robust business intelligence program, more efficient operations through maybe a enterprise resource planning system. So whatever that driver is, I think that needs to be figured out. Oh, I think the maybe the third driver, which is really overarching, is really the need to have better data quality. And
mm-hmm,
it's not really what the goal is. I mean, having better data quality, it's done for a particular purpose,
mm-hmm,
but that purpose again fits with all of the above. Having better data quality um, really helps you with meeting that regulatory compliance, helps you with better AI, enhanced data analytics, a more robust business intelligence program, and so on.
So
But
what should be the initial first, like, is it like data governance takes place first before achieving the data quality, or those goes hand on hand, like both should happen parallelly? How it goes, like?
I think they definitely go in together. You can't have one
Mm,
without the other. It's really a very close partnership.
okay, okay.
So if you and you can start to do data quality, but you'll run into roadblocks. You'll discover soon enough that it's not a sustainable practice if you don't have data governance. And then again, if you want to do data governance, even though data quality is not your goal,
Mm,
maybe your goal is that regulatory compliance, you'll discover that you will do different data quality tasks to improve the quality of the data in
Mm-hmm.
order to meet that regulatory compliance, right? So, for example, if you don't know that your customer lives in the European Union, or if you don't properly correct that they've opted into a newsletter or opted out, then you can get into trouble,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they do come hand in hand, even though data quality might not be that driver, that goal of data governance. It's one of those beautiful side effects of having data governance, that you will achieve better quality data.
Yeah. So, majority of the current scenario, if we consider large employers are struggling to achieve that data quality compared to the that's why they are not ready, that they are not ready to build the AI, get into the AI side that easily. But when you come to the startup side, like a small scale companies, they are actually in a stage where they can say that they build the platform for their own company. So is it just because of the quantity of data, or it is difficult when it comes to the big organizations and it's easy to implement when it comes to the small organizations?
Yeah, good question. And I think it depends. I mean, it's really a factor of things.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it's more difficult with larger organizations because they tend to have more systems, first of all, right? More data sources.
Mm-hmm.
They also tend to dwell into multiple industries too, and not just one, right? So multinationals and
Mm-hmm.
um, like Coca-Cola, for example, or yeah, for some reason I can't think of another one,
Yeah.
but they tend not to just dwell into one industry. And even if they do, there are really so many more facets of it. They have, so many types of different services or products that they offer,
Mm-hmm.
that the whole business environment becomes quite complex. So there are a lot of knowledge that needs to be tapped in, a lot of people that need to be consulted and worked with. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, you're dependent on those as roadblocks, because you're depending on their time, their availability. So there are a lot more people, I think, to take under considerations, a lot more business rules to be aware of, a lot more privacy laws, even restrictions to be mindful of. And the
Mm-hmm.
whole supply chain of data tends to be a bit more complex. At the basis, though, it's all about the same principles, but I think from the size of the environment, it tends to become a bit more difficult for larger organizations than it is for smaller ones. And then I think another analogy is to think about is, right, when you have like a large freight ship,
Mm-hmm.
it you can steer it into a different direction, but
Mm-hmm.
it really takes so much more energy and effort to do so than if you have a little tugboat that
Mm-hmm.
you want to change its direction.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is very insightful and useful, I feel. So moving to the next question, it is again along the same line actually. How should we establishing data governance within the organization? So we already discussed a couple of things around it. If you have anything to add, you can just add actually. If any organization wants to establish the data governance, I feel the way I understood it, it is like it takes lots of efforts as well,
It
because
does.
it depends upon how many data sources are involved, how many verticals are involved, and as you mentioned, it depends upon the kind of a scale of the employment as well, like whether it is a large scale, big scale, smaller scale, or the middle scale kind of. So any other challenges when it comes to establishing the data governance within the organization?
Oh, I mean, quite a few. There are quite a few challenges. For starters,
Mm-hmm.
it's still something that's not understood,
Mm-hmm.
right? So already, if you do have a sponsor and
Mm-hmm.
somebody higher up that says, hey, we need data governance,
Mm-hmm.
that's already a big win,
Mm-hmm.
because most of the time it's really from within the company, the organization, that an individual arises and says, listen, we do need data governance. And then it's up to them to basically volunteer for the role or try and push that communication up and try and secure sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big challenge for sure. It's hard to really put that business case together.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because they don't know, all the issues and all the opportunities that there might be there, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really to to get somebody on board to support it, and
Mm,
not just verbally, but to finance it as well, because you do need at least one person that's fully dedicated
yeah.
to data governance.
Mhm. Yep.
So I think that's how really you start. You need to have a lead in the first place,
Yes.
and then that lead can help to put that business case together. They can help with as is analysis to
Mm-hmm.
understand really the current environment. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's easier if that individual has been there for a while, because they have the context. But of course they can be somebody external to the organization as well. That has its benefits because they come with a fair with a pair of fresh eyes.
Mm-hmm. And who all, like, when we talk about achieving this data governance, it is not part of the list, but I would just like to ask, like,
Hmm.
who plays the like important roles when it comes to, like, establishing the data governance within the organization? So suppose you assign the lead, but what
Yeah.
is the lead is doing, like, which teams he gets involved into, like, which verticals, like how he has to approach for it when he has to establish the data governance.
And again, that depends based on those needs. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on what sponsor you're able to get and what type of financing.
Okay.
Usually what I recommend is that the individual does not just act alone,
Mm-hmm.
and that they at least have some sort of a data governance council, committee, decision group, whatever you want to call it. But really what this council, committee, decision group does, they at the very least, they come up with those priorities for the data governance program. They decide what should the energy, the resources be invested into, because there's a lot of areas to tackle. There's a lot of different data domains to approach, and you can't really just boil the ocean, right? You need to really take it one cup at a time. And it's this group that should make that decision. What should be that first cup that we want to boil?
Mm-hmm. Do these data governance people need the domain knowledge as well? Uh, how much
I
the
th-
domain knowledge matters?
mhm. And again, I recommend a mix. And
Mm-hmm.
it depends on the size of the organization and the type of organization that you have. So normally you want people in there that do have a say, that do have an influence
Mm-hmm.
in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also good, to your point, to have a mix of people that, maybe they
Mm-hmm.
just know at a very high level,
Mm-hmm.
but some maybe they're just their manager, but they're very um, deep into that specific data domain, and they can speak to it. If not, if they're more a high level, but you want to select them in this group, as part of this group, because they're highly influential
Mm-hmm.
and they can help you steer that message, steer the boat in the direction that you want to,
Mm-hmm.
then at the very least they can um, depend on their own team to
Mm-hmm.
come up with whatever answers, questions, challenges that need to be solved.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And when we talk about this, implementation of data governance, are there any best practices associated with it?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I don't think there's really a particular template that
Mm-hmm.
one can follow. I mean, just if you take a look at all the different data governance maturity models, there are a few. There are more than five. There are more than 10 even. So each one of those, they tackle the approach to data governance implementations a bit differently. So just looking at that really tells me, well, there's no right path to take. And
Mm-hmm.
usually, again, there's no cookie cutter solution, because we're all special snowflakes in terms of the organization, and we all have our particular needs. What works for one doesn't really work the same for other. We can definitely learn from one another, but we can't apply things in the same way. But as best practices and as recommendations, first of all, I would say that you need to treat it as a program
Mm-hmm.
and not a project. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people starting this, they refer to it as a project. Hey, it's a data governance project. The
Mm-hmm.
problem with that is that the project has the end date,
And it, yeah.
right? So people expect it to be done. As with data governance, you always need to keep investing into it. So I think that's the first advice and the best practice to follow. That it needs to have a program. It's never ending.
That's very wise. I feel like, differentiate between the program and the project. So that
For sure.
definitely is useful. And we talked about these rules and policies associated with. So how does those get defined in the data governance? Again, it is specific to the industry actually you are working with, but you could like to give any example or any use case that you worked on, kind of, and how this those get defined.
In terms of the
Data
policies.
governance, yeah, policies and procedures, how those get defined when it comes to the data.
Yeah, and really, it again, it depends. I hate to say it, but it does depend. I think it's really you need to to get at the ground level first to understand all these pain points,
Mm-hmm,
to understand the as is situation, and then to do a bit of analysis on what's that to be,
mm-hmm,
because that's what the policy and the procedures are trying to solve. How do we move from the current state
mm-hmm,
into the future state, right? So I think you really need to have that that deep knowledge. So work with data stewards on a particular data domain, data experts, data owners, whatever you want to call them, data custodians, have
mm-hmm,
all these people involved to understand what is it that we're trying to solve and what is that best way to do it.
mm-hmm,
So usually this is done by a data governance lead or a data steward as a starting point, and
mm-hmm,
they put together this draft, and then this draft really gets presented to this working group, to this data governance deciding committee, for them to come up with any other recommendations, ideas, questions, to revise it, to polish it. And then they get to vote on it in a democratic way
mm-hmm.
and to see if it does pass or not.
Okay. Yeah. So this is very knowledgeable. I feel like, when we are talking about this data quality, how data governance can play the important role to achieve that data quality as well within the organization. So thank you so much for sharing. And moving to our, towards the leadership style actually. So what is your leadership style, and any kind of your favorite leader whom you follow and why, kind
So my leadership style, I don't know if it has a name per
of.
se. I think I do try to emphasize on the growth and the success of my colleagues, of my team, to try and make decisions based on their inputs as much as possible,
Mm-hmm,
right? And definitely, I think my focus is providing credit when credit is due, and
mm-hmm,
make sure that the people are praised publicly and often, as often that as possible. I think it's very important to encourage them, to put them up there, to let others know that, hey, these are my colleagues that have done all this work, that
mm-hmm,
have contributed to this project, that or came up with a solution, whatever it might be. I mean, it really takes a village, takes a team to get everything done.
mm-hmm,
And so often all this work really gets obfuscated
mm-hmm,
to the rest of the company.
mm-hmm,
So as managers, or at least that's how I like to lead, is I try and make sure that they are up front and center as much as possible
mm-hmm.
in front of the organization. In
Okay.
terms of a specific leader that I look up to, I don't necessarily have one besides the ones that I've had before and the ones that I do have right now in my own workplace. I've really been very fortunate to
Mm-hmm,
have had incredible managers that were very supportive in the projects that I wanted to take on, in allowing me to take risks.
mm-hmm.
I think that's also very important to not be afraid to try new
Yeah,
things. So
yeah,
I've been very fortunate that I did have very, very supporting and encouraging managers so far.
yeah. I also met actually along the journey of my career. Actually, definitely you find those kind of leaders within the organization as well, and who can play the important role of your growth. So definitely that makes sense to me. And then moving towards your, when we talk about once person finds his interest or the passion in particular area, like what one needs to do to achieve that leadership in that particular area, like any steps or any kind of extra mile they have to go to achieve that leadership in that particular field. one thing you mentioned that, don't afraid of trying things. So that is
Right.
something I definitely feel towards the leadership it counts. Anything specific uh,
Well,
to
and to add to that, besides not being afraid to try new things, is also if you do make mistakes, right? When you're wrong
yeah.
because you've tried those things, really don't be afraid to take ownership for those mistakes,
Mhm.
right? And admit it when you're wrong. And all of this, I think it helps to build trust with your colleagues. It
Mhm.
shows that you're genuine. It shows that you're not trying to, push somebody under the bus for your mistake.
Mhm.
And so don't be afraid to try, but also don't be afraid to admit that what you've tried might have been wrong as well.
Okay, yeah.
Besides this, I think it's also very, very important. And sorry, this is ironic because I've interrupted you,
Mhm.
but it's I think you need to understand what's happening around you by observing and listening. Active listening, I think it's a very important skill
Mhm.
that we all need to develop and we need to do more of.
Yep, yep. So you have to be a good listener as well along the line.
I think so.
So thank you for sharing. Moving to the next question, it is what kind of a skill set one needs to pursue to get into the data governance field?
That's a good question. I'm not quite sure. I do know communication is
Mhm.
really a very important aspect, as I mentioned, of data governance.
Mhm.
I was part of this conference a few years back, and one individual there said that data governance is probably 90% communication.
Mhm.
Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but still, communication plays a big role in data governance. So I think it's important to do have those communication skills as
Mhm.
part of your skill set.
Yeah.
So that's one, and of course all the others in terms of the project management, program management, because data governance is a program, people management, conflict management, even
Mhm.
there's a lot of butting heads at times,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I
So
do
is it
think you
because
also need
like
to have that expertise as well. It helps to have an expertise in a particular industry or data domain. It helps.
yeah, so the way I think about it is like, data governance is a lot more about when you talk about a lot more about rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. It is important to convey those, like, in the right words,
Hmm.
so that everybody can understand. Uh,
Hmm.
so I feel, yeah, that is something a useful skills to have, actually, communication skills, if anybody wants to enter into this data governance. Also, I feel like decision makers also, when it comes to ML or AI modeling, when they decide to make a decision out of it, that time also actually that communication skills plays the important role to communicate what are the insights or what they forecasted and how that benefit to the organization. So thank you so much for sharing. And moving to the last question of this podcast interview is any kind of a courses or books would you like to recommend to the audience who are looking to build their career in this data governance?
Well, I definitely recommend starting with the DAMA Book of Knowledge.
Mhm.
I think that provides a solid foundation, not just in data governance, but data management as well. And data governance is covered there as well. But
Mhm.
it's really this very nice, comprehensive oversight and look at the whole what they call data management knowledge areas,
Mhm.
including data governance too. So I think that's a great starting point. And I also recommend checking out my course on how to build an award-winning business glossary.
Oh, that's good actually. So, are you when you are talking of we are like I saw you a couple of videos actually on the YouTube. So,
Thank
are
you.
you deciding to give the like mentorship to the people, like online webinars in the data governance or something like that?
Yes, I,
Okay,
I do that.
okay. So yeah, definitely you should, like, I will just convey that to the audience. Actually, do subscribe to his YouTube channel so that you can learn more about the data governance. And one more time, actually, thank you so much, George, for providing your time and being a guest on my podcast. And hello, everyone. Hope you will enjoy this episode and learn a couple more things about data governance and how data governance can help organizations to achieve that data quality so that they can have the effective solution for the ML or the AI level. So,
Thank you
until
so
next,
much. I really
yeah,
appreciate your time and great questions, challenging questions.
yeah. Thank you so much for your insights, actually. So, definitely. I will definitely stay connected with you. And whenever I publish this podcast, I will tag you so that people who would like to directly connect with you, whether it is on YouTube or the LinkedIn or wherever you are available, actually. So um, they would
Thank you.
directly can connect with you. So yeah, so thank you so much. And
Thank you.
yeah, see you guys soon. And until we
Yes.
happy leading, let's lead
Keep in
together.
touch.